So, hi everybody, Mary Hunt here at Water. This is our Water Talk for April with Carter Heyward on her book, which I will be shamelessly talking throughout the hour, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, a call for action, a call to action. And what a day we have to do this. I want to introduce my colleagues here at Water. Diane Yu is with us, the other co-director, and Patrice Rupp is here, who is from Germany with us for a year through the Brethren Volunteer Service. I would never get it quite right. BVS, the Brethren Voluntary Service, and Irene, which is a German organization that provides volunteers to work in nonprofits. Also, Pamela Miller is with us, who is a Master's of Divinity student at Wesley Seminary, and she is here doing her practicum, as it were, the practicum for the MDiv, and she's doing that at Water. So we're delighted that she's with us and for the year, but also that she's with us today. And I believe I saw somewhere he's actually under an assumed name. He's under the assumed name of Pamela Miller. She's here twice, but it's Joe Cinto, who is our wonderful chief volunteer. And we had the opportunity last week at this time to be celebrating his 90th birthday at a wonderful Italian restaurant. So and he's in working today. So Joe does everything. He does the mailings, he does the American Express bill, he fixes things, and he trained to be at Water for many years by working in the federal government. He was the senior counsel of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So he has prepared himself well for his work here at Water, and his late wife, our beloved Carol Cinto, who was with us for almost 20 years as our editor, passed on. And when she passed on, Joe took over her volunteer slot here and has been with us in those now many years since the loss of our beloved Carol Cinto. So Joe, welcome to you and to each and every one of you who are here. This is a warm day in Washington and a warm Water welcome to everybody. I am delighted that Carter Heyward is with us and that we can discuss her book on the day after the arraignment of the first American president to be indicted. I can think of few topics more relevant to the heart of the matter with our former president than white Christian nationalism. I noticed, to my shock, that some members of Congress have now replaced those little lapel pins that they wear, those little American flag lapel pins, with pins that depict AR-15s. Mm-hmm. This is a very frightening thing to me, but they wear these apparently in the halls of Congress. So before we move into our primary reason for being, let us begin with a land acknowledgement. We at Water are on indigenous land in Silver Spring, Maryland. This is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma and injustice toward indigenous people that is deep in U.S. culture and history. We join in efforts to eradicate it and to make reparations for the genocide involved. Water's work is aimed to bring about social justice. I invite you to consider just for a moment the Native people on whose land you sit. Let us take a moment in silence to honor them and commit together to making social change. Thank you. Water's work brings feminist, womanist, spiritual values and intellectual work to efforts at social change. We're not here just to do this because it's fun, although it is, and we're not here to do it because it's smart, and it is. We're here to do it so that we can equip ourselves and one another and bond together in the doing of social change. We feature and count among us many of the most insightful and effective scholar activists, including, of course, our guest today, Carter Heyward. Our hope is that by sharing in this setting, we are socializing the resources of feminist work and religion, and thus spreading tools and energy for justice. Let me simply say something about our format, and then Carter, it'll be all yours. I will make an introduction of Carter, so those of you who don't know her will have a little bit more of a sense of who she is. And then Carter will have 20 or 25 minutes to talk about her book, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, a call to action. We invite you to sit back and enjoy, have your lunch, whatever you're doing. We'll take notes, and the notes as well as the video will be on our website probably next week. We have a little vacation coming up, but they'll be on the website by next week. And you can feel free to use this, to share this with other people. to use it in a class if you want to use it with a group. Anybody who's going to use it and to make change with it is welcome to use it. That's our approach. We will end at the top of the hour, which is 2:00 here on the East Coast in the US to respect everyone's schedule. And then you'll be able to re-listen or point this out to people by going to our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. Look under programs and teleconferences, and you'll see a picture of either a book or Carter's face, however it gets put up. And then there'll be a video along with the notes that we will take. And we will also send you, since you're obviously registered, we will send you the notes to your own email so that you'll have them. And it will have a link to the exact place where you can find this video. So I am just delighted that we've got this opportunity. And when we finish it, to those who want to stay on and talk a little bit longer will be welcome to do so. But those who have to be excused to move on to their next commitment will be able to do so graciously when we end at 2. Let me then move on to an introduction. I want to welcome my friend and colleague, Carter Heyward. It seems, Carter, like we've been at this work since we were pups. If we're lucky, we may have many more good years of work ahead of us, as the need seems to grow despite our best efforts.
Mm-hmm.
The Reverend Dr. Carter Heyward is an Episcopal priest who now refers to herself as a Universalist Christian. She's a feminist liberation theologian of renown who cut her teeth on social change in North Carolina, where she learned firsthand how white racism works. She and her teenage friends insisted on desegregating a summer camp, and thus she began her lifelong commitment to justice. She earned an undergraduate degree from Randolph-Macon Women's College, a master's in comparative religion from Columbia University, and an MDiv and a PhD from Union Theological Seminary in New York. Many of you will remember, as I do, her ordination on July 29, 1974, a feminist milestone in church history. Carter and her colleagues, the 11 women ordained, really did something new. It was not against the law, as I learned recently, but against the practice, the way of operating of the Episcopal Church. So those women and their ordaining bishops can rightly claim credit for polity shift in what we now see as a model of nonviolent structural change. Her later coming out as a lesbian added luster to the historic event and set a trajectory for her leadership in LGBTIQ works in religion. Carter taught at Episcopal Divinity School from 1975 until her retirement in 2006. Her pioneering work in feminist studies included her important reflections on LGBTIQ issues, including her foundational book, Touching Our Strength, The Erotica's Power and the Love of God. She has written or edited 17 books, most recently the volume we're discussing today. Carter lives currently in an intentional community in the mountains of North Carolina, on that beautiful redbud land. Her lifelong love for animals is expressed in the therapeutic riding center that she's helped to develop. And she reports that her volunteer work these days includes being vice president of the local chapter of the NAACP. And, not least, she plays fiddle with the Bold Gray Mares, a group whose name I adore. Carter, welcome to Water, and congratulations on this book, which has already opened new conversations. I trust that process will continue today. The floor is now yours for 20 minutes to explore some of your ideas with us, and then we'll join you in conversation. Thanks for being here, and a warm Water welcome to Carter Heyward.
Thank you, Mary, so much. And hello, Diane, and so many people in this room whom I have known for many years. And it just moves me more than I can say to see you here and to have us here together for what I feel sure will be an important conversation for me. As always happens in the teaching world, I learn at least as much as I could ever teach. And this has happened repeatedly with this book, which would be very different if I were writing it now than when I wrote it about 18 months ago, or whenever that was. Let me just say that the 7 deadly sins of white Christian nationalism grew out of a conversation with several of my woman friends in Western North Carolina immediately after the January 6th insurrection. And all 4 of us were writers. And we all said, you know, it is time for somebody to say something about this in writing. And who better than a bunch of Christians to talk about the nefarious, dangerous theologies that underlie so much of what we've all been taught in our churches. And when I say our churches, the four of us were Protestant, 3 Episcopalians, 1 Presbyterian. All of us were in some sense post whatever it is we've grown up as. If you hear a little bark like that, it's because we have a puppy in this house, and I don't know what the alternative is. Just there is no alternative. We have to listen to her bark occasionally, but I hope she won't be too disruptive. Anyhow, my friends and I said we should talk about this, and let's try to write something that could be public about what has just happened from our perspective as Christian feminist liberation theologians, all 4 of us white, all 4 of us Protestant. That led to about 6 months of discussion, lots of writing of paragraphs and pages back and forth. And what finally happened was that we had so much going on that we had to sort of divvy up the task, and my portion of it became what you see here as the 7 deadly sins of white Christian nationalism. The others also have been working on writing projects that hopefully will see light of day through publishing before long, and all are in some ways connected. If you were able to read the preface and the portions of the intro that I sent, you'll know that this grows out of a long-standing concern of mine, sparked way back when. I mean, Mary and I, Diana, and others of you and I were doing what we could in the late 70s and early 80s on projects that are not unrelated to this. Dorothea Zola was a teacher of mine at Union Seminary and would become a very dear friend of mine over the years. She's the first person that I heard coin the term Christo-fascism. Someone in one of these Zoom rooms asked not long ago, what's the difference between white Christian nationalism and Christo-fascism? I'm not sure there is much difference, although I tend to think that, at least in the United States of America, Christo-fascism I would describe as the energy of white Christian nationalism. It's a kind of historic, unfortunately, historic energy that pushes in the direction of white supremacy, holding it in place, misogyny and homophobia, the capitalist spirituality, which winds up being the chapter that most people in most churches want to talk the most about. In some ways, it's the hardest to talk about. And we can talk about why that is. You probably know why that is. But this is an evil energy. And I spent most of my decades as a professional theologian when I was teaching and speaking here, there, and yon, avoiding use of the word evil very often, hesitant to attach it to a person, for example, thinking of it more as the absence of good, or something that we all share in, and I think that is true, that we all do share in the systemic evil of the world, and this book is about that, which is why I wrote it. But in this book, I did not want to mince words, and so I think we really are talking about evil now. And we always run the risk of projecting that onto people like Donald Trump, because he is almost a caricature of evil in our midst, everything that he seems to stand for, which is so damaging and hurtful to so many and to the earth itself. This book really invites those of us who are liberal, progressive, even sort of centrist, moderate Christians to think about how we ourselves are involved in the doing of evil in the United States of America, and have been for 400 years in so many, many ways. People say, why use the term sin? It turns off so many liberal Christians. And sin, by the way, to me is connected to evil. As sin results in evil. the sin, the action results in evil, which I see basically as systemic, even though it gets personified. I think that we need to reclaim the concept of sin, not as a personal failure, but as a social, bad social failure. It's also systemic at its root, that we inherit it. In that sense, Augustine was right. So we inherit this from those who've gone before, not so much personally, they may be nice people, but what they have embodied and stood for. And I know this, my own life as the great-great-granddaughter of slave owners and of people who are doing horrific things that I can only distance myself from personally, and yet they're part of my family. I came from that, and we carry with us what we come from. And as some maybe could have even been Mary, but one of my wise white feminist sisters once described being an anti-racist racist, or working against the structures of evil, even though we participate in them. And the older I get, the more clearly I believe that's the case. So I wrote this book to challenge Christian congregations, primarily congregations, because I really envisioned the best work being done in community, but Christian networks, Christian and post-Christian, anybody who knows the language at all of Christianity and knows when somebody says the Jesus movement, probably what we are talking about, or at least have a language that we can share and we can sort of take apart together if we need to. Saying, hey, folks, let's, through Bible study, through book study, through community conversation, through activities in our parishes or in our study groups or in our neighborhood association, wherever it is we meet with people that we can talk to and want to talk to, let's talk about these things. Let's talk about what I'm calling the 7 deadly sins, which are, if you have not read the book, let me just read them for you. The first 2 are kind of, I call them sort of sins of the soul, and they're universal. They are not specifically American. And most of these things are not specifically American, but they take particular shapes in the United States of America. The lust for omnipotence is what I name as the first deadly sin, for power over others, and a real lust for it, the craving for power over others. The second deadly sin, entitlement, which goes hand in hand with omnipotence. The third, white supremacy. The fourth, misogyny, and as my beloved former partner and teacher, Beverly Harrison, connected beautifully, misogyny and homophobia go together, that you really cannot have one without the other. And so misogyny and homophobia would be the fourth deadly sin. What Beverly Harrison named as capitalist spirituality, I name as the fifth deadly sin. That's the convergence of the modern economic system we know of as capitalism, which is now a global movement, and really Protestant spirituality in the first instance of a high doctrine of the individual over and against the common good. Both capitalism and Protestant spirituality have had that in common and need badly to be corrected. Robert Reich has, in the meantime, let me just say this parenthetically, has helped me wrestle at least with the possibility that what we need to be talking about is democratic capitalism rather than democratic socialism, simply in order to be heard in the United States of America. Because if capitalism were really democratic, it would be just, or could be just, with the right kinds of regulations and the right kinds of understanding of how we are related to our neighbors in terms of wealth and give and take and the social good and whatever. But anyhow, capitalist spirituality is a huge, huge issue for me. It was a huge issue for Bev Harrison. She wanted to write a book about it, but died before she could do that. And so this chapter in this book is in some ways I wrote it as kind of a tribute to Bev, because she would have wanted somebody to say something about this. Sixth sin, domination of the earth and creatures, and seventh sin, violence in all of its many forms. People say, what about others? Why are they just seven? That's a great question. There certainly could be others. Two that I would add to this list where I'm writing the book today would be Christian anti-Semitism, which is in the book, but I tend to put it with white supremacy, and I have a little section on it at the beginning, because anti-Semitism is enormous, and it is a sin, and it issues in great evil, and has for so many centuries, and has always been part of the American landscape. And the second one I would name would be gun violence, specifically gun violence, sort of, which of course I put in the book under violence. But I think Americans need to do something about this gun idolatry in our country. So those two really belong right up there with the other seven. And then there's the deadly sin of silence. Our silence as good Christian people, and good people, period, whether or not we're Christian. Silence because we feel too ignorant to speak up. Silence because we're afraid of what will happen if we speak up. Silence because we don't quite know what to say. It doesn't seem like it's ever quite enough, or to the right people. We don't think it makes a difference. There's so many reasons that we don't speak, and that certainly liberal Protestant churches, and I would think Catholic churches would be right in here with the Protestants in this sense, are too often our liberal Christian sisters and brothers, and we ourselves are too quiet in the face of evil and in the face of injustice, including our own. And so this book is more than anything a call to break the silence and to act, and to do so together. Do something, do it together. None of us needs to be alone. This is one of the great things I must say about Zoom these days, is that we can all be all over the nation and maybe the world in this minute, but here we are together in spirit and in conversation. And this is a great thing. Not everything's great about technology, as we know, or even about Zoom, but this I think is. Let me just see if there's anything else I really need to say before we open it right up. In case, I will read you what Samuel Perry and Andrew Whitehead, how they define Christian nationalism, because this is really where we took off, my writing friends and I. They wrote a book that many of you know, I'm sure, called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States, published by Oxford in 2020. They wrote, Christian nationalism is a cultural framework, a collection of myths, traditions, symbols, narratives, and value systems that idealizes and advocates a fusion of Christianity with America, with American civic like, and includes assumptions of nativism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and heteronormativity, along with divine sanction for authoritarian control and militarism. And I would just continue, the Christian nationalism in America, or white Christian nationalism, as I try always to point out, is a serious social and political effort to superimpose Christian teachings and values on the laws and structures of the United States of America, to shape this nation into a theocracy, basically, in which the rulers of the nation, like the leaders of Iran, and more recently Russia, Hungary, and Brazil, to name only a few of the most blatant examples, can claim that the laws of the nation are in fact the laws of God. And therefore you cannot abridge them. If you disagree with the leader, you're disagreeing with God. And we may think here in America that is a long shot from where we are, but it's not. And, I know you all, some of you here on this Zoom screen well enough to know that you know exactly what I mean. I imagine all of you do. We're not far from that. We see what's going on, not only in terms of the Trump's problems, but what's happening in the Republican Party and the failure of people, even people that arguably are really good, decent people like Mitt Romney, others that we may not agree with politically, but in the past have spoken up, have had, very real contributions to make to our nation, if not always what we would want. But the silence on the parts of these people is just deafening. And the refusal of people to say this is unacceptable, this movement toward Christian nationalism. No, we do not want to be a Christian nation. We will not be a Christian nation. And yes, many of us are Christians, and we're delighted to be people of Jesus, people who have community within the Christian traditions. But we are not interested and will not stand for this being a Christian nation. And here's why. So this book is an effort to get people to talk about the here's why and to figure out what we can do about this in the nation, in our states, and our local situations with our school boards, and with others who are wrestling with these very issues. So I'm going to stop at this moment. I've talked almost 20 minutes, I think, and see where the folks here are.
Carter, thank you so very much. This is the WATERtalk, and we are talking with Carter Heyward. It is a pleasure to do so, and it is a time now when we can all get into the conversation. Carter, just for your information, there are people on this call who come from Ireland, Canada, Ecuador, and I'm sure I have missed some
How
others.
great is that? Well,
yes. So if I've missed others, please maybe put it in the chat. But there are also a number of people from various places around the country.
right.
And there are people who come from a variety of religious traditions.
Right.
I would say overwhelmingly from the Christian tradition, perhaps even by origin, if not in the contemporary moment. But I think much of what you have said will be very familiar to people struggling as we do, as you do, with what to do and how to be at a time when I always say my only regret when I'm gone from this world will be to say, why didn't I speak up earlier and louder? And, some would say, well, golly, you've been early enough and loud enough for quite a long time. I think there's no early enough and no loud enough. And I think you have reiterated that. So with great thanks. And again, I want to mention the book again, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism. And don't miss the subtitle, which is a call to action. And that's really what sessions like this are about, is to get us into action. So the floor is now open. And I urge you to use the handy little hand, the reaction button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen on Zoom. And you simply raise your hand, and as I've just done, and that will put you at the very top of my screen. So I'll be able to see you. And then when you're finished, you just lower your hand and we move to the next person. It's helpful to say your name and to say something about you, so we have context, but keep it brief. We're lots of people. We are probably 40, almost 50 people on this call. So please do keep your comment brief, but really feel free to make a comment. It doesn't have to be a question. We want to hear from lots of people. So again, with thanks to Carter Heyward, the floor is open, and the book is really wonderful. I recommend it, and I only have 9 questions on my list. So I'm gonna sometimes I send my list afterwards because I get so frustrated that I didn't get to ask my questions, but others will be first. So go ahead. Who's first? And please feel welcome. We'll start with I think the name is Stokes, certain Jeanette Stokes. Is that Stokes from the Center for Women in Ministry in the South, one of our favorite sister organization. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Thank you. Hi, Carter.
Hi, Jeanette.
I want to make a few biographical comments about you and me and why I think you're perfect to have written this. One is that you and I fortunately, or it is the history of this country, share slaveholding ancestors.
Mhm.
Mine were in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, and other places. So I'm interested in that part of your history. I'm also interested in the period at which you were at Randolph-Macon. There was a sit-in at a lunch counter in Randolph-Macon while my friend Mary Abusaba, Mary Bentley, was a student there who was about your same class. And so I'm interested that you were in college when that was happening, and then moved to New York, and of course your theological career. So I think all of that sets you up to be an ideal person to write this book and to open these conversations. I also love that you said you are post whatever it is you were raised, which is the way where I find myself. I'm Presbyterian and ordained, but I'm sort of, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm in good standing as a retired person. I have not retired from my job.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that I think, and when you went to seminary, the years in which you went to seminary, when I think James Cone was still teaching and Beverly was teaching. And so thank you for bringing all of your life and learning and experience into this book. And I can't wait to read it and encourage congregations and other groups to use it.
Jeanette, it is just,
Before
it's a
Carter,
joy to,
before you start, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Jeanette Stokes provided us with an equally compelling look at her own life a couple of sessions ago. And I recommend people to go on our website at www.womensalliance.org and look up under WATERtalks the Jeanette Stokes presentation, and also get her book through the Resource Center for Women in Ministry in the South, which is a autobiographical look at another woman from the South in theology. So Carter, if you haven't seen Jeanette's book, and others who haven't,
I'm going to order it this afternoon.
But as a tease, just watch the hour, and you'll get at least a tease. It's just a start. But go ahead, Carter.
No, I will do both of those things right after we leave here today. Jeanette, it's a joy to see you, and you have always been near and dear to my like a sister heart, even though we hardly ever see each other. But I hear about you, and I am so grateful for your ministry and what all you've done here in our state and other places as well. Thank you so much for what you just said. Let me just say something about Randolph-Macon and that sit-in, because that was before my time, and I never knew those women. I went to Randolph-Macon Women's College in 1963, and that sit-in had been in 1961, but it was very alive and in the air when we got there. And so those of us who entered Randolph-Macon in the mid 1960s knew very well about that demonstration. And the best we could do was to carry on protest and doing whatever we could. There was a horrific, the Lynchburg Daily News was this awful paper in terms of race. Well, really in terms of everything, but it had a policy where it would not publish anything but bad news about Black people. And so a bunch of us Randolph-Macon girls, and all of us were white at that time, would go and protest the newspaper and be hauled off by police. I was never jailed or arrested, but you'd be sort of hauled off and sent away. And it was a ridiculously unjust and racist situation in Lynchburg, Virginia in the early 1960s. And with Edith and Mary Beth, I think were the names of the women. They became icons to us at the time. And yes, I was at Union Seminary in a great time with people like Jim Cone and others teaching. And but even more with all these wonderful sisters and white sisters and sisters of color who were fellow students. And we were all learning with and from each other. And one of the things I thought about when I was writing this book, and I think I mentioned it in the part you read, this thing, I had read Elie Wiesel, and I was very eager that the image of looking out the window and watching history go by, including the evil, I thought, I really do, this is not how I can live my life. So my commitment was, I'm not going to be watching out the window as I pass through this life. And yet, teaching theology, being an Episcopal priest, having the safety of institutional fortress, really. I mean, you're in an institution, albeit a wonderful, progressive institution. The Episcopal Divinity School was great. Still, I had the safety of that most people in this world do not have. So in many ways, I was doing my work. I like to think that much of it was important work in its own little way, but it was doing it while I was looking out the window at all that was happening. But I also realized that writing, speaking, preaching, teaching, organizing other white, for the most part, white, middle-class, educated people is very important work in the world. And it's not simply looking out the window, that what we're all doing, and I don't know what most of you here are doing, but I know you're activists in every ways you can be. And I know you think about these things or you wouldn't be here, and that you're trying to do something. So I guess I want to offer you what Katie Cannon offered me and other white feminists back in the 1980s when we were teaching together. And it was the concept of pebble ethics. She talks about that in her written work as well, that we do what we can. We may feel guilty that we can't do more, but we're doing what we can. And even to toss a pebble, whether it's a book like this or an organization like Water, God bless Water, or whatever it is you all are doing, any of us are doing, it has effects, and the ripples go out from it, and other people hear about it, and other people get on board, and then we never know where it really goes. And some of the most rewarding work of my life, or rewarding messages that have come to me in my life, have been from people who say, I don't know you at all, but I met a student of yours, and that student changed my life. That is pebble ethics. And that is what I love. That's the best part, to know that, our lives are connected. And that is a gift that all of us can bring and do bring to this life. Thank you, Jeanette.
Carter. And thanks, Jeanette Stokes. And for others, look up that Jeanette Stokes event. It was wonderful. And we move to Heather Dean, and then she'll be followed by Sheila Curran from Dublin. Go ahead, Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Dean. I work with gender justice at the ELCA, and I also have to mention that I was in Lutheran Volunteer Corps, and I lived in Carter Heyward House in Chicago, which we called Hay House.
Hey, I didn't even know that existed.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Hi.
Hi. So the ELCA is working right now on this issue of nationalism in terms of putting out social teaching document. And one of the questions that has come up again and again is how to reach people who are not already, who are kind of in the middle. Is there any language or theology that you found helpful in the book, in talking with folks, about how to kind of turn people's ears a little bit to be more sympathetic?
Yeah. Thank you, Heather, for that question. And that really is one of the primary reasons for this book. This call to action is written, I think, I tried to make it accessible to people, the people you're talking about, because the first thing I think we have to do, and not in a pseudo way, there's nothing fake about this, but is to align ourselves with the people that we're with in a congregation. One of the ways to align ourselves, I think this is usually, it helps, I believe, and that is to acknowledge the fear that I feel, that I assume they feel about whatever the issue is, about all this movement around white supremacy. There's a chapter in the book that calls us to approach the blackness of God. And I'm very quick to say, that's scary for me as a white person to try to figure out what does that actually mean. And I remember when Jim Cone first talked about God being black at Union Seminary, I wanted to keep that at a distance. I didn't keep it at a distance for all that long, but I was frightened by that. I'm saying this only to say that I think it helps to be able to identify with the people in the fear and the not knowing what we're going to do and the not having the answers, even though we may have lots of suggestions to make, to let people know in the local Presbyterian church, look, these are some things you might want to think about. You might want to join up with these Episcopalians across the street here in Brevard, North Carolina, and think together about this. And so there's 6 of you and 6 Episcopalians who are really interested in reading this book or talking about some of this. Why don't you do this together and share your life experiences, share your fears, share your hopes, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think that helping people know that they're not crazy, weird, or worse, evil, simply because they have questions. Because we all have questions and we all have doubts and misgivings, and we're up against huge forces. And we're not going to solve any of this stuff in our lifetimes, regardless of how young you may be. It's not going to happen in the lifetime of people who are currently, but it can happen in small bits. It can happen in small pieces. And that's what I think we're here to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Carter.
you.
Thanks, Heather. I love the idea of Hay House.
Hay
Sheila
House.
Curran from Dublin will be followed by Elizabeth McDonald. Go ahead, Sheila.
Hello, Carter, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. Now, my context is very different. Like Ireland has a completely
Yes.
different context. That doesn't mean to say all that you said does not apply. And like I'm from a Catholic tradition and I can identify with so much. But I suppose 2 questions that come to my mind, and I'm particularly interested in the piece you spoke about, the sin of silence. Your
Yes.
president is coming to this country next week.
I'm sorry, who's coming?
President Biden
Oh,
is coming
yes,
to
yes.
Ireland next week, and
Yes.
we have a long relationship that the peace Ireland had a very traumatic and troubled past
Yes.
in all sorts of ways, but we had, the war that happened within Northern Ireland, and we're celebrating 25 years of a so-called peace process. And some of the brokers in that peace process were American presidents, namely the Clintons, President Clinton. But what I find fascinating in terms both of the use of religion, because like everybody, would state this war to have been a religious war, which was not a religious war. It was more, what everybody else knew. But anyway, but it is now Biden is Catholic, and, Ireland is no longer Catholic in so many ways. And but the silence is around the complicity with war, the subtle complicity with war that goes on with the way United States is with involving in Ukraine or its history in the past, within Latin America. And I suppose I was a member of an organization back in the 80s called the Sisters for Justice, and I'm very much influenced by Latin America and worked in Latin America and around liberationist theologies who were able to call out the complicity to the alignment of the socio-political constructs with religion as well. And when Reagan came to Ireland, we were on the streets because of America's foreign policy with Latin America at that time. Now there's nobody on the streets around calling because there's this welcome for the so-called pseudo-democratic, complicit in war theories that, as Christians, we cannot really stand over. And while everybody demonizes Trump, in terms of the use of religion and religious rhetoric, nobody seems to demonize how religion is used in so-called pseudo-democratic ways. And I just wonder, would you have any reflectiveness on that in terms of silence, the sin of silence, of how we mask what we perceive to be democratic or good living, or like in Ireland, like it is, these people are really going to help. While underneath this, there's of course, the war machine, the gun violence, the making the economy thrives on war, and all the other hidden agendas against this communist obliteration of freedoms, while all these freedoms are being obliterated in every democratic country in a different way. So it's just when you say, because Biden uses his faith quite a bit, and particularly to a rhetoric in Catholicism that's from an era that no longer exists in this country. So I'm just interested because you really struck my mind going 10 to the dozen about the silence, but the lack of the voice today, where in the 80s we had a lot of counter narratives to that.
I-
You know, sorry,
No.
I don't know where I'm coming from, and I'm very different.
No,
context,
Sheila,
so-
you're raising a question that, I mean, I cannot begin to answer such a question as this, but I do want to say it is so important. I have a very good friend who's very active with the Quincy Institute, which you may know here in the United States is very, very much critical of our war machine, whether we're Democrats, Republicans, whatever we may be, saying very much about the United States, including people like our president and people really like me. I mean, people like many of us who are not mindful enough of the ways in which our military agenda is impacting every single thing we do as a nation abroad and really at home too, I'm sure. But that that war, we're able very quickly to assume that God is on our side. To use quote the old song, that somehow if we are fighting it, it must be right, or that's certainly what we're told, and that's what our leaders, our elected leaders, want us to believe, and we make too easy a peace with that. I mean, I feel like the questions you're raising, Sheila, could be 1, 2, 3 more books to really take this apart. The book that I have here would benefit from that, would be strengthened by that, because the violence chapter needs to go way further. My friend who's with the Quincy Institute has pointed that out. He likes the book. He says it's fine as far as it goes, but what about violence in war? You know, yes, gun violence in America, you know, but what about the violence of war, and what about this, how we fool ourselves in believing that we are doing the right thing, and we really mean to be doing the right thing, but the results are so damaging to people all over the world. So I think that's what you're getting at. I can only say I think the question's wonderful, and that we should all be asking it, and that a perfectly legitimate critique, not that this is why you've raised it, but I can say it myself, critique of what I've written is that it does not go far enough or deep enough into the question of violence.
Sheila, for your question, and Carter for your response. And Sheila, just so that you know, I think there'd be many people in this country who would completely and utterly agree with you on the Biden question vis-a-vis immigration policy.
Yes.
Disappointment and real
Yep.
really disheartened situation on our hands with Biden coming from a Catholic perspective. I say that as someone from the Catholic tradition on the immigration. So it's the parallel case here that you're going to be raising. And thank you for your work and others,
Yes.
both in the Sisters of Mercy and others with whom you work in Ireland. I hope there'll be some noise next week when Biden is there, and you know, let him have a Guinness Zero and think about a few things.
Yep.
You know that he needs.
Thank you.
Let's go on, and we'll have 2 more questions. Elizabeth and then Rosemary Ganley will have the last word, and then we will unfortunately have to call a halt to all good things. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm linking in from Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe territory in Canada, also known as Kingston, Ontario. Carter, I had the privilege of being a student of yours at Episcopal Divinity School in 1988. And you had a big influence then, and I can hardly wait to get my hands on the book. And I just a shout out to 2 colleagues, 2 other ordained lesbian United Church ministers who are part of this. Teresa and Nan are here on the call, and there may be other United Church folks I haven't seen. Carter, I'm part of a liberal denomination, United Church of Canada. I think Christian nationalism we're in a very different context. It's certainly not the same as in the States. However, lots of parallels, lots of influences. And what and I haven't read the book yet, but what I'd love to hear you speak to is something interesting I've witnessed in my tiny corner of the church and the world. Our denomination's committed itself to becoming anti-racist. So is paying attention and trying to dismantle white notions of Jesus any liturgical language, any images. We're trying to dismantle those. We're trying to broaden that notion. And at the very same time, in the last 10, 15 years, the emphasis, the return to, the clinging to Jesus being straight, cisgender male is absolutely stunning to me. It's really hard to have a conversation about pronouns related to God and Jesus, because we all know Jesus was born a boy.
Mhm.
So anyway, forgive I'm getting a little excited here. Forgive that. I'm just glad to be here. But I'd love to hear you speak to what you're observing. And I'm just in terms of where sexuality, gender identity, sexual orientation fit into white Christian nationalism, white supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good to see you again after all these many decades. You look great. You know, the misogyny and homophobia, as I said earlier, people tend to identify capitalist spirituality as the hardest thing to talk about. I think it's kind of a pointless question to try to figure out which is hardest, because people, Christian people, including United Church of Christ people and Episcopalians, who are pretty liberal too on the whole, do not want to talk about sexism and misogyny and homophobia. Everything, this would get me off on another lecture entirely, but I think the feminist liberation and womanist, our impulses as women looking at Christian tradition is to notice that, boy, the work has not been done at all across the board, Catholic or Protestant, in this realm. Yeah, we have women bishops in the Episcopal Church. That's fine. And there's some great women there, but so what? You know, women priests, so what? I mean, yes, it's nice, but really, but in terms of the nuances and the depths of sexuality and gender issues, we haven't begun to, we haven't scratched the surface really, or we've only scratched the surface. So you're not alone in this, Elizabeth. And I trust you know that. It is a huge task. And I think the United Churches, I mean, the United Church of Canada and here in the States as well as the other liberal denominations, need to really, really be called on this. And the book tries to do that a little bit. I mean, not a little bit, a lot, but even make some small changes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Your point is well taken. And it's kind of sad to think of all the work that we've done and how little impact we've had. And that just makes us work harder. Yep. Rosemary Ganley will have the last question comment, and then we'll end our session officially at 2, and we'll leave the Zoom on a little bit if people want to chat. Sounds like there's some friends in the crowd. Rosemary Ganley, go ahead, from Peterborough.
Okay, good afternoon, Carter. I just,
hello, Rosemary.
We Canadians, we take over, you know. I mean, I just met Elizabeth. She's just down the road from me in Ontario. Thank you. But also, I want to pay tribute to the fact that your work, Carter, is internationally important. We Canadians are trying to prepare ourselves and critique our own capitalist spirituality and prevent any theocratic values from arriving here. That's our task. And not only do we follow America in every wrong direction, but we follow America's prophetic voices like yours. And this book is going to strengthen our resistance. We're going to build a wall, Carter, and get Mexico to pay for
it. Yes.
But I just want to tell you from an international perspective how important your work is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And I've only been to Canada maybe a half dozen times in my life, but I really, really like going to Canada. It's a great place. And right now I am completely immersed in Louise Penny and
Oh, yes.
love her, her work and admire very much a lot of what comes out of Canada. And thank you for being here and thank you for what you said.
I'm going to leave it at that, although I can tell Diane New and Elizabeth and others are excited about the notion of Louise Penny. Diane New has read every word. There have been months in our lives when we haven't even spoken to each other because she's been, I'm sorry, I'm reading Louise Penny. Who's Louise Penny? I begin to wonder.
My Sue feels the same way.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Rosemary Ganley, for frosting the cake here. I think you've said it well for all of us that this book, The 7 Deadly Sins of White Christian Nationalism, A Call to Action by Carter Heyward, is an important volume for these kinds of discussions. I urge you to socialize them, to take the video of this and to use it with friends, and mostly to get the book. It is available as part of a series that our dear friend Kwak Pui Lan has put together through Roman and Littlefield. And so it's a wonderful way to see how all of our circles intersect. So our conversation has just begun. I'm going to close us now officially with great thanks to all of you for being here. Wish you warm wishes for Passover, Ramadan, and Easter.